Welcome to this first global discussion organized by Art and Design Teacher Education and Pedagogy Cumulus Working Group. And before we go further, I want to remind that this event will be recorded and published under the event website afterwards. So you can come back to this, and on the other hand, people who are not able to participate in the middle of the day, at least in Europe, they can come back and see what we have discussed. I'm Martti Raavara, and I'm working at the University of Aalto in Finland, and we have co-hosts Andreas Kooli from University of Arts in Zurich and Minna Suomniemi from Aalto University. And shortly to tell about this Art and Design Teacher Education and Pedagogy Working Group. It was launched nearly 4 years ago, and the idea was that within Cumulus we could go deeper in pedagogical issues. What is art pedagogy, what is design pedagogy, and so on. And we have organized several workshops and seminars during conferences, but now this new situation have also pushed us to work forward with this kind of virtual meetings, which is very inspiring in a sense that we find different ways to work together. And about this program today, I can share my screen now and you can see the program. So we will have 2 hours time, and first we have Lolita Dutta's presentation, then 10 minutes break, and then Karin de Jonge's presentation. And if we have time and energy at the end, we can have a general discussion around these themes, and also we can discuss what kind of events we could organize in the future. A couple of practical things before we start. I prefer that we keep videos on, if it's possible, that you have a good connection and it's working. It's more fluent for the situation and also, I think, polite to presenters. And then when we have discussions, we can raise hand, or we can use chat, or we can use this remark tool for asking a comment, time for a comment. And it would be nice when you ask something or comment something that you tell your name, and it would be also nice to know where you come from. But I think this is what we need now. Probably, do you have anything to ask before we start? If not, we will start with Lolita's presentation. We have 2 interesting presentations coming, and you are able to see the abstracts of these presentations on the site. And first we have Lolita Dutta, and Lolita comes from India, and she studied design at the National Institute of Design and has over 30 years experience in the field, and Lolita has worked in government, for the government of India, as well in private and corporate sectors, and she's practicing designer, but as I know now, more as a design educator. I'm really waiting your presentation. Lolita, please, the floor is yours.
unmute yourself. You're muted.
Okay, thank you, Andres. Yes, I did study at the National Institute of Design, which is NID, and India's definitely one of the premier design institutes. Currently, I am the head of department in the Department of Visual Communication at the United World Institute of Design, which is a part of the Karnavati University. They are both located in Ahmedabad, which is in Gujarat, which is in the western sector of India. I also have with me my young colleague, Abhijit, who's worked somewhat helping me and assisting me on this little bit of research. He's done most of the creative work. And yes, I have been very into education. I've practiced for many years as a communication and exhibition designer. That's been my forte. And today I'm happy to represent both India, I think, as well as the Karnavati University here, so that we have an idea now of what is happening in India. As we had in our earlier discussions, we do know that India is a developing country and there are a lot of changes. We have tremendous manpower, we have very good skill, but we do still have a lot of issues which we deal with, and we have the pandemic and the whole COVID situation. There have been problems that we've all had to overcome, and we've invented ways of teaching in the new normal, as we call it. And I'm going to take you through a short journey of how design education started in India and where we stand today. So, Abhijit, yes, I think we can start. Yes. So that's where we are, design education in India, the traditional to digital. Yeah. So this is something which is my philosophy, and I think it kind of is a metaphor which I share with, thoughts of design, where I say design is about attaining that perfect circle. The circular ride is never smooth and perfection takes time. It is something our ancestors taught us, and it is after all a circle of life. And so with this, I'm going to present and begin my presentation with the first slide. Abhijit.
Yeah.
So in the current scenario, there are over 500 design institutes spread all across India. If you see, there is a sort of concentration on the western side, which is Gujarat and Maharashtra, which are the two states. Gujarat is where the first design institute was set up on the banks of the Sabarmati, which is the NID, the National Institute of Design. Delhi, which is the capital of India, has a large concentration of design institutes. Gujarat has a large concentration, Ahmedabad has a large concentration of design institutes. Mumbai and Maharashtra and Pune have a large concentration of design institutes. Bangalore has a large concentration of design institutes. And others are scattered in other parts of the country, which are lesser in number. So as a result, there is a huge student migration which takes place. So design students or students migrate from one part of the country to another part of the country to gain design education. So now the question is, but when and where did design education actually start? Yeah. So the beginning. So what was the beginning? The beginning was from the Vedic times. And the scriptures, our ancient scriptures, were tenets of learning, and this was filtered down in a certain process which students learned, which people looked at. So these scriptures were like really ancient. Then we had a very interesting system which is called the Gurukul system, which was a mentor-based learning. So which is called, in Indian language, it's called the Guru Shishya Parampara, in which the Guru is the mentor and the Shishya is the student, Parampara is the practice. And here the practice was essentially, and this is how it was, you know, they sat around the guru and they learnt, and it was usually in a very open sort of an environment, and you lived over there. So it was a residential sort of a learning as well. And the focus, there was a lot of focus on humanities, medicine, but there was a huge focus on performing arts, crafts, and therefore that is what led to design. And the knowledge was therefore skill-based, and it was sharing across generations. Yes, next. And thereafter, in 1901, prior to this, actually, the story goes that Rabindranath Tagore's for a very peaceful place. And Rabindranath Tagore, as you may know, is the Nobel laureate we have from India, also responsible for our national anthem. And so his father found this very beautiful place in the sort of wilds of Bengal, so as to say. And the color of the earth was red, and the trees were all very beautiful and green. And it was very peaceful, and there was a river flowing through. So he stopped there and he said, oh, this is a very peaceful place, and maybe, you know, it will be a place of learning. So that was his thought. And then years later, when Rabindranath actually decided to start this whole institution, which was in 1901, and this set the tone of actually not just education, but also in some ways the education for the artistic endeavors. So there was a lot of emphasis on philosophy, on arts and humanities, and all this was done in the sort of confines of nature. So you sat around trees, the student could climb trees, they could sit on the rocks and stones, they could sit on the floor, and there were these beautiful buildings, of course, quite influenced also by the colonial British rule at that time, so the shuttered windows that you see. So Bengal has a rich culture where there's an influence, in fact, of French and Portuguese and the British. So it's a kind of a mix which has some very beautiful architecture. And if you go to Calcutta, which is the capital of Bengal, you will see some very, very beautiful architecture. So this was how Shantiniketan was conceived of. And the arts were given a lot of importance. In fact, Shantiniketan has given India some of the most famous artists, that some of them who are still alive today. And this later, therefore, became very famous for the artistic and performing art endeavors. Then there's a huge jump because India was struggling for freedom, and we attained freedom only in 1947. So yes. So then in 1948, with the then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, there was a vision, which was a vision for setting up a design school. And the reason for doing that was to have a lot of interface with industry, look at better aesthetics, look at better arts, because we did have, and we still have, a very, very rich legacy of craft. And this is very evident, especially in our textiles, I would say, to a large extent, some of the old products that we have, and some of the systems that we have created. And with this in mind, the Ford Foundation at that time invited Ray and Charles Eames, who we know as the erstwhile designers from the United States, and they visited India, and they traveled in India for about 3 months. And then they used the lota as a metaphor. Now, the lota is this very humble sort of, what should I say? Well, it's a object which you can, you drink water, it's ritualistic, it's even used for ablutions. So it's a very, very interesting metaphor for design because it is so versatile. And they wrote this extensive report, which is known as the Eames Report, which I'm sure a lot of you may have heard of in design schools, design philosophies. And this set the tenor for the first design institute, which was to be in Ahmedabad. And this was started in 1961 with the help of Gautam and Hira Sarabhai, who were patrons of the arts in Gujarat, and of course the government. And so NID today has an extremely rich history and a rich legacy of design. It was at that point a lot influenced by the Bauhaus and Ulm. So this is where the Western influence in design actually began. And a lot of the earlier people who joined NID as graduate students were sent to these places to study, to learn, to become trained to teach the furthest institutes, to teach further students who were going to join the National Institute of Design. And then after 1958, it was actually in the 1960s that the first students actually came in and the foundation program actually started. And it was a very first strong foundation. And even today in India, I think a lot of the institutes lay a lot of emphasis on the foundation program. And all the foundation programs are really, really very strong. But at that time was a lot of emphasis given on cohesive learning, research, and to disseminate that information in a very strong manner. There was a liberal outlook, both in terms of how society was, as well as how the studies were. So there was liberal education. So we learned a lot about architecture, sound, music, film, light, a lot of things. And that was such an important part of design learning. And I was fortunate enough to be there in the 70s, by which time the program had just about got established. So it was a beautiful, beautiful learning process. And there was a lot of emphasis, which was sort of being imbibed, I would say, from that culture of environment and being in the environment, being in the open. So being, learning in the environment, learning about culture, learning about society, which became a very ethnographic way of looking at things. And we looked at that philosophy in a very interesting way. And there was a lot of understanding of how we would look at aesthetics, what were ethics, and a lot of the projects, most of the projects were all industry-centric. So the students also learned while they practiced on an actual live design project. So there was a lot of hands-on learning, so as to say. Yes, and thereafter, yes, Abhijit. So this formal design education looked at design process, it looked at design thinking, it looked at critical thinking, and it looked at hands-on thinking. Now, this philosophy has still remained in Indian design education, but now the scenario is a little different, which we are going to come to, and I'll leave you with those questions. So we'll look at it as we go along. So this was the first thing, and this, I think we've all gone through this. Anybody who's had a design education knows that these are very important processes, and without that, you don't really understand the larger context of design. Then, therefore, after this, in the 80s, what happened was that's when Indian design education really came of age, because similar to the National Institute of Design was the National Institute of Fashion Technology, which is one of the largest fashion institutes in India today. And along with that came a lot of other privately funded colleges and technical institutes, which were imparting basically software knowledge, also became a very large part of this beginning of this digital culture. And it is while this whole establishment was taking place that there was a trend, there was a shift from hands-on was moving a little bit to digital, but it was more software based. And all the software was doing at that time was enhancing the quality of your work. It was not thinking for you, neither was it putting any thoughts into your head. It was a tool which was being very effectively used across all sorts of institutions all over India, not just for design, but for education at large. But yes, for design, it did play a very major role, and things did begin to change at that point. Now, this is where the change happens. So what happened when offline went online? Now, today we know that students in India are the second largest internet users in the world. It's a huge, huge number. And we have over 409 million internet users, of which a lot of it is used for education, both for school, that's primary education, as well as higher education, as well as design education, technical education, architecture, and virtually all the arts and other humanities, other sciences, everywhere. Yeah. Then came, then we have, so what happened when this transition took place? There were new findings and there were new learnings. So one of the things that we've learned recently, very recently, I think, is that digital skills are important, very important. Virtual reality is becoming a sort of reality. But on the other hand, there is a lot of overwhelming, there's an excess of information which the internet gives us. And when the student uses this excess of internet information, there could be some little disruption in their ethics and the way they look at content. And sometimes content can be plagiarized, it can be misused, it's misunderstood. And this could lead to sometimes poor quality design education, I would say. That's a very personal point of view, by the way. Yes. And thereafter, so while the digital world evolved, yes, now today, therefore, what is happening? India is still a developing country. We are still grappling with many, many issues, and we saw how acute some of those issues were just during the last few months when the pandemic hit us, where we had the labor population that were migrating from one city to another. They didn't have food, they didn't have shelter, even water was a problem. There was a huge gap in the way society functioned. But yes, but the problems that impact us, one of the problems is that we do have a low per capita income. We do have problems like electricity, connectivity, Wi-Fi, bandwidth, smarter laptops, high-end laptops, and of course, we have a very, very diverse demographic. The demographic from the north, south, east, west is very, very different because culturally, each sector of India is very different. The rituals are different, the ceremonies are different, the upbringing is also different. It is only a lot of us who live in metropolitan cities, who've studied in large metropolitan cities, who have a broader perspective to things. But we still have a huge population of students who come from smaller towns, from villages. And so the demographic of coming into, let's say, even a design institution can be very unnerving for a lot of students because there is a huge cultural disparity sometimes. And I've seen this happen with my own colleagues. I've seen this happen with the many, many students that I've taught over the years. There is a shift. There is sometimes this huge paradigm shift, and they can completely spin out of control. But that's not to do with anything. It's to do with the diverse demographic. They're as smart as any student anywhere else. So while that is happening, the digital is now becoming the new normal, as to say. So while we are struggling with these issues of laptops and we are struggling with these issues of connectivity, so what has come to our rescue? It is actually the smartphone. Yeah. So the smartphone has really come to the rescue, and we've been using it as a medium of instruction to teach. And my colleague who has been teaching very effectively using this medium, smartphone, Abhijit, who's here with us, I think he's going to give you a little explanation of how this medium has affected us in recent times. Abhijit, can you just take over? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So while teaching regularly, we've noticed that most of our students actually prefer the smartphone over a laptop. I'll just speak about a survey that was actually done by the HRD Ministry, the Higher Secondary Education Ministry in India, along with a couple of leading newspapers in India, one of them being the Hindustan Times. The first one is only 41.2% of students attended classes in Delhi University, which is a major university in the country, since the lockdown began. Out of those people who actually attended classes, only 10% students attended classes from a laptop. 79% students are using smartphones to take online classes. The number of smartphone users in India is estimated to reach 760 million by the next year, 2021. A platform called Byju's. It's an online teaching platform who mostly teaches kids from 4 years to about 18 years old. Since the lockdown began, there has been a rise in 200%, a 200% rise from March onwards to the number of students that they have now. More than 60% of students across 9 major cities in India are actually using YouTube and other social media platforms like Instagram, LinkedIn to learn and also share their skills and learning skills. Second, yeah. Most of the students who actually prepare for these competitive exams that we have in India depend on YouTube and these tutorials that are available in YouTube to learn something.
Yeah, so we've seen this from like the current times, that students are still preferring the classroom, although we have, I would say, a pretty decent attendance in the online classes that we are doing right now. It's all digital. We are teaching them digitally. We are teaching subjects digitally, which I, for one, never thought was even possible, one of them being typography. In fact, Abhijit assisted me on that module as well, where we had to really, I honestly had to really innovate to think, how am I going to teach this complex thing, which is absolutely critical for a graphic design student to understand how typography works? How am I going to teach typography? So while it's all very well to prepare a presentation and show them things, practically, how do we actually see them through this? So, so from using my pen and paper on my papers over here on my desk and holding it up for them and showing my hand movement that, okay, this is how you hold your brush and this is how you move it and this is how you get a curve, which the students actually followed. And we had some amazing, amazing results with the work the students did. And for me, that was a personal success. And I'm sure Abhijit will definitely agree with me on this, because at the end of which, what we did with the students is we created a virtual exhibition of their work. So that became a very interesting transition of how something which was so hand-driven, so mind-driven, could become digital in a manner of speaking, even with people, a lot of people like me who have very limited digital skills, I would say, and turn it into something which could be a new reality. Now, it was very well appreciated. A lot of people went, they saw this whole virtual exhibition. So that gave us hope that there are so many things we can actually do. But yes, there are lots of issues which I'm not getting into because that's a completely different line of conversation. But it's a thought, because on the other hand, there are several mental issues which are impacting students today. There are tiredness issues, there are eye issues, there are body posture issues. So there are a lot of medical issues and a lot of mentally disturbed issues which are impacting them today. And as we said, can we, again, that's a question, and we had this conversation, I think Marty brought it up, is that can we use influencers like the YouTube, like Instagram and other platforms to also create an interesting platform for education? I think we can. I think there is a lot of things happening there. And whatever it is, the Indians are very, very clued on to the internet, as we just saw those staggering figures, which is really almost half the country. And I think what that leaves us with, as also with the challenges, what is then going to be sustainable education? Are we going to, can we adopt something from the old tree education and bring it into a new environment? Can we create a different kind of environment? What can we do? Can we look at different philosophies? Because the philosophies of learning have also changed over the years. Can we create new philosophies for design education? How do we create those philosophies, and where do we create those philosophies? Do we become therefore design nomads, where we just go, or we can do transdisciplinary learning, we can do cross-cultural learning, we can go across continents to do learning on various digital platforms? Is that going to help that student? Is it not going to help the student? How valuable is the real life experience as opposed to the digital experience? I'm not sure, but I think it's a question which I would like to also pose to the audience, and we can discuss that. We can discuss that at different platforms today, whenever the time is, because I think it's very important to see where we are actually headed and where those changes are going to be, and what can we adopt from the old. How can we not have disrupted education? How can we have more sustainable education for the future, and how do we actually do it? So, you know, it is important because India has existed as a intrinsic part of, you know, learning, and design has been a very critical, integral part of this. And we followed these paths of rituals, we followed these through centuries, we followed this through generations. We've had a very strong influence of the father-child, father and son, well, I don't want to sound gender specific, but I would say, you know, at that time it was very gender based. But the dissemination of influences of information and how it came down over the ages, how it impacted society, how it changed lives, and how it gave birth to design. And design, as we know today, it's not a subject. I think it's almost a philosophy which people are living by. And yes, as educators, as responsible citizens of the world, I would say we have a large role to play in seeing what we can do to create better education platforms. I think we are ending over here with a quotation from Rabindranath Tagore, who was really the, I would say, guru of starting an interesting philosophy of education. So thank you very much for being a part of this. And I would look forward to questions. I would look forward to a dialogue. And the dialogue, I would say, is far from over. We can have several dialogues. We can present different things. We can still research. I'm also looking into several other aspects of the philosophies of design and how we can integrate that, where we could take those. But that's going to take a little time. So sometime later, maybe on another platform. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Minna. Thank you, Andreas, for allowing us this fantastic platform. And I wish everybody all the best. And I'm now really looking forward to Karin's presentation. But I think, are we taking some question answers?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Lolita. It was really inspiring to have this contextualized perspective, so that you understand, you gave us understanding of the history and the context where these things are happening. So it's very meaningful way of telling these issues. But I open the floor for questions or comments, please.
I have a comment or a question. Thank you, Lolita. Really very interesting. Where I'm very curious about in the new ways of learning and education in India. What would you like to take from the traditional backgrounds to the current education, to design thinking?
You know what I would really like to take? I think we've become like boxed in. It's like being in a classroom, you're in a box. It is very important to take the student out of the box. Now, because of a lot of education becoming almost business propositions, I know it becomes very difficult to do that. But even so, if we have that impetus to take the student out of the classroom, give him or her that exposure to things that are happening around, you know, where the philosophy of old, I think, is very important, is because we saw people like just sitting under the tree or just sitting by the river. I know it may not be possible in a class of 90 or 80 or whatever we have. But even with that, I did this experiment, in fact, last year. I took a batch of 70 students. I just took them out of the classroom and took them into a forest for a day. And it was the most fantastic experience. And what was the most beautiful part was the students who had never spoken in class. They had really, really never spoken up in class. We encouraged them to just talk, and they spoke, and they came out with their own stories, and they shared things with us. And that sharing was such a fantastic learning. I think that learning was very, very interesting. And that was a really beautiful learning. So I think that kind of, I don't know how we can do that. It's very difficult to do it. In these times, everybody is paranoid. But maybe 3 years down the line, again, things get a little, life gets a little more systematic. Anything can happen. So that's what I would really like to do.
Minna, please.
Kind of along the same lines, I think it's really the key point in your presentation, the 3, and having the students having the learning in a different environment. And I have been thinking a lot how to find possibilities to do this in times of distance learning. How can we I did an experiment with that each student just went outside to the forest on their own, and then we came back and connected online. But yeah, it was really interesting in your presentation, this what to keep from the ancient, what to keep from the ancestors' pedagogies, and how to integrate that into the new urban kind of digital environments. Is that even possible? This is more of a comment.
Yeah.
Question.
It's a question. Yes, it is. Okay.
Andreas, please.
Just to mention something which is quite funny, because we started in Switzerland, in Zurich. I'm from the Swiss University of the Arts in Zurich, ZHDK. We started to make a learning tool, a concept which is 4 years old, and it's based on mobile phone for youngs, for technical, like wood, textile, metal, design in schools. So 4 years ago, it was quite revolutionary and quite visionary. At the moment, we are in the mainstream. So we had the same problem as you mentioned, Lolita, that we have a lot of YouTube videos with some kind of doubtable qualities. We have a lot of information online. And the strategy we have taken was to produce hundreds of videos from high quality to show how you can learn skills and to make some kind of projects, online projects. And then they have been like double sides. So one half of the platform is for the youngs, so they can also work at home, I hope, so that because it's open all the time for them. And the other half is for the teachers. So the teachers have also the possibility to get better skills and get some kind of support. So that was a strategy, just to use the media, but try to make it better.
Yes, I agree with you. But how do we do that?
It was a long work and quite, we worked since 4 years, and it will be published next year. So
okay.
I have no feedback if it's really working out, or if the quality is good enough, but we will see next year probably.
I think it's the quality is what one needs to evaluate. That is the most important thing in design. Yeah.
One of these interesting things you mentioned is that how to step out of the box. And what I have heard a lot is a kind of cap that you don't know the box, so that it's very difficult to step out if you don't know the box. So it's connected what you mentioned, that it's how to take this tradition as a part of renewal. And especially in the case or situation we are now, that this change is very much pushed by technology, which is it's a kind of external push. It's not our internal renew of curricula. And now we are facing a new kind of situation, that how these things, like you mentioned Bauhaus, which is part of my education background, that all these
mine too,
crossing borders within art and materiality and all kind of haptic things which were important as you described, also related to nature and how to have this holistic approach, use all your senses, and in this new situation we are somehow struggling with these kind of things, that how to keep this materiality involved and how to have all senses used and so on. But I think that partly we are confused because we don't have experience of using mobiles or laptops or virtual environments as a part of that. As Minna described, that okay, students can close their mobiles and go to the nature and really have this physical connection, and after that they can share their experiences virtually. But it's a kind of coding. I don't have a real question, but your presentation spoke up some ideas that okay, these kind of things are
possible.
On the top.
Okay, thank you.
But I may continue a question concerning this trans or cross-disciplinary approach. How much in India you are discussing about these issues? That design should be,
I think,
having that kind of dialogue, and also you mentioned this Bauhaus background, how architecture is related, like in Bauhaus it was a holistic approach.
Very strong. Yeah. The Bauhaus approach, I think, really doesn't exist anymore because every institution has come up with their own, formula, or they've taken a sort of scraping from the original National Institute of Design format, but everybody's reinvented it to other things which are very, very different. But so that's the Bauhaus bit, because I'm not sure how many people are still. Now it's the other way around. Now form doesn't follow function, function follows form. And this constant debate goes on. So that whole system has changed greatly, actually. It has really, really changed. About the transdisciplinary, I think a lot of experimentation in the design education sector is now beginning to happen, where we are looking at transdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary backgrounds. We ourselves in the university where I am right now have started a program, which is a global program, where the student will be sharing some semesters here and some semesters in another institution. So it's the first of its kind. Let us see how it works out. It's not a great revenue feasible model for a lot of people. For those who can afford it, yes, but very few can afford it in India. So the larger model still remains, but within that, how can we make it transdisciplinary? How can we encourage students to work in different domains through the projects that we give them? So we, at least in our department, have a very project-centric learning as well. So after the student has learned or got his or her skills intact, let's say, and basic knowledge, basic skills intact, we encourage them to work on project-based platforms. And those platforms can be completely transdisciplinary. They could look at something in fashion, or they could do something else with packaging or whatever. So that's a process, but it's not, again, a very easily done process. The cross-pollination is something one has to still, I think, experiment and see, because I think, it's not just an exchange of student, it's also exchange of faculty and of mental, I would say just processes. How do these processes work? What is it that we can do? How we can bring things together? And to do that, you'll have to have that cross-cultural exchange for us to come up with even a story, even if it's a philosophy of some kind, as I said, maybe it's a new philosophy. But it could be very, very interesting. It could be something we should maybe look at working towards. Definitely should look at working towards. I hope that answered some part of the question.
Yeah.
I was very much of the generation where we followed the form followed function. And the design process was very, very strongly embedded into us. And we followed that for a lot of things we did. And it also gave us the freedom to do a lot of things in a lot of ways. So while there was a certain, I think, rigidity later attached to it, there was also a lot of freedom given in that space of learning.
Andreas.
I just wonder, so what we have some projects here. There's another university is more like social design. So for example, we have a transdisciplinary focus in the way you work with local craftsmanships, or you work with social workers in the way that you do design, but you do it under the perspective of, let's say, developing a special area in a city, or supporting people to solve a problem which is
Problems.
Yeah. So do you have several similar approaches to test it out?
We do in some of our courses. We in fact have certain modules on social design, but it is something I think that really needs to be developed, and it needs to be developed not just in one domain of design. Like I am specifically speaking to a large extent about visual design, visual communication, where we lay a lot of emphasis on the user experience, the user inclusivity, user-centric, and therefore the social domain. But to have it being imbibed in all disciplines of design is not something that I think we've really looked at. I know our department has definitely looked at it, and we are trying to do a lot of things with it. I also work with a very smart bunch of students. Yeah, we do have social design. We have it in various pockets, but we don't have it as a specific program, which would be actually very interesting to do. Yeah. So yeah, I agree with you there. We could look at that. We don't have it as a one-off thing. We take parts of it and embed it here. And in fact, I teach one part of social design, which is community, and how we look at social problems, how do we solve social problems. Last year, in fact, we took the 17 SDG goals and we gave students projects based on that. They could choose. And so they came up with a lot of interesting things. So that was one way of looking at it. Yeah.
Actually, that is one of these areas which is connecting design to pedagogy, because I think in social design we are very much facing these questions of role of designers and rethinking that how people who are involved or participating in the project are part of the design process, and we are facing the same question in learning. We could say learning design, that how we take students involved of the process, not only as learners but as a part of this guru role or master role, so that mixing these roles
together. Yeah. So that's
a
the
little
role.
bit confusing.
Yes, and the role playing is very important. But right now we are just, I think, dealing with this whole online thing and this learning on phones and learning on, that's becoming it's stressful to some extent. Abhijit is teaching a lot of disciplines across the thing. I don't know, do you want to add something to this, Abhijit? To the struggles of online teaching?
I think you've kind of summarized it really, really well. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but it's an interesting time. I know what's going to be the outcome of all this. So we have to see where the future is. So that's the dialogue. I think those are the questions we need to really look at. Those are that's the larger picture.
But it's really
so
interesting.
Maybe we could.
It's really interesting that you have this technological side. The technology is developing very fast, and like you mentioned, electricity and connectivity and high-end laptops and so on. It's very much in a big change. And then you have users habits or ways of doing things which are connected also to commercial apps or development like Airbnb and different kind of things which are changing our ways of behaving. And then you have this learning side. So we are always facing that there is different kind of realities which we are facing and which should adopt or at least rethink our teaching and courses through that. It was really interesting that you have so much emphasis on these mobiles now already going on, which we are probably coming to face a little bit later.
We are dealing with the mobile revolution over here. There's a variety of phones available. And it's very interesting because even in the lower economic section of society, says a lot of domestic workers who come, they work, and then they run back because their children have to use the phone for their little school projects or their school education, because they cannot, one family can just have one phone. So there is that kind of a difference in the ladder. We are the privileged few, I would say, but there are a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues right now. Okay.
I found out that the clock is already 8 to noon in Finland. So probably we keep now 10 minutes break. You can exercise, have a beer break and refreshments, and then we come back. But please keep the connection on and just close your mic and video, and then Karin will start, let's say, 3 minutes over noon.
I will.
Okay.
A small break, a bio break,
Okay.
and then we come back.
10 minutes,
See you soon. See you soon.
3:30.